Hi, everybody. I'm Ralph Ben-Murgy. Welcome to Not That Kind of Rabbi. To be clear, as always, I'm not actually a rabbi. I am ordained as a spiritual director, a spiritual companion or counselor, as it were, through the Aleph program in the United States. And if you ever want to find out more about that, just go to aleph.org and check out what they do. But there's rabbinic program, rabbinic pastor program, and spiritual direction program, which is the one I took. But if I was a rabbi, I wouldn't be the kind of rabbi that made me go, "Oi, really? Seriously? God is a guy and he's talking to me specifically." So that always turned me off. So I always looked for something that had more of an experience to it than a lot of stuff in the head. So I wouldn't be that kind of rabbi. There, I've clarified. Yet again, I don't know why I do that. It's like I have fear that, an Orthodox lawyer is going to knock on my door and go, "Come here, I want to talk to you for a second. Come here." So I accept it. The show, Not That Kind of Rabbi, is sponsored in part by Kaplansky's Delicatessen, great mustards, great deli in the airport at Pearson International Terminal 3, but you can order all kinds of things. I've got a Kickin' It Old Shul t-shirt from Kaplansky's Deli. You might want one of those. You can order it online at kaplansky.org and put NTKR as the promo code and you'll get 10% off on the purchase because you're listening to it here. As well, they have signature mustard packages, spicy, baseball. What was the other one that I just had? Oh, I can't even remember. There's 4 in a pack. You can order those. I have two packs at home right now. The kids go through them like nothing. So I love it, and you will too. And I thank Kaplansky's for being our sponsor. So the plague continues. If you're still listening to this in the time of the plague, and somehow, unfortunately, I think that time is longer than we think it was going to be. And it is squeezing different and interesting things out of me and the people around me. It's so unnatural to walk down a sidewalk of a street, see someone coming and cross the street purely because you don't know if they've got something you can't see, taste, or feel that might kill you. And when I think about that, it's really a profound thing that we've internalized as a new normal. And what it did is it made me think about one of the things I deeply care about, which is the effects of extreme climate destruction on the planet. And I think to myself, I've spent 10 years trying to convince people that this is more than a burning issue. It's here. And I can't. They don't want to know. There's a book called Don't Even Think About It by George Marshall, a climate communications specialist from the UK. And people just can't take it in. So why can they do other things that are extraordinary measures when it comes to a pandemic? And I realize it's because there's an idea that you personally may die almost immediately if you get this. And the climate change conversation is, I'm sure it's somewhere over there. It's not here, it's somewhere over there. And because of that, we kick it down the road, and politicians allow us to kick it down the road because they'd rather take care of today's problems than tomorrow's. And it made me think about how we think about life. I heard an Indigenous elder yesterday talking about why she bothers with the investigation in Canada into the missing and murdered Indigenous women's cause, which is horrible, a horrible thing. And she said, I just think everything through the lens of my 12-year-old granddaughter. That's how I see it all. What kind of a life do I want for my 12-year-old granddaughter? So the thinking in Native circles is of 7 generations of thinking. And if we start thinking that way about all of our problems, we'll stop thinking about who's going to get elected in 2 years' time, in 1 year time, in 4 year times, and start thinking about what legacy we want to leave for people. And we need a moral compass for that. It's hard. It's very hard. So I worry. I worry that we're doing okay on this pandemic in some times, in some moments, certainly in Canada. I worry very much when I think about the United States, where it has been conflated with this notion of freedom. Freedom? Virus doesn't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat or a conservative or an NDP. It's a virus. It's agnostic. It'll take you or not take you. There's nothing to do with freedom. It's to do with obligation and responsibility. And if you think about that for a second, we have devolved in our conversation about what we owe and what is owed to us to taxpayers. I'm a taxpayer. This is for the taxpayers. We're not taxpayers. That's an economic unit of measurement, taxes. We are citizens. A taxpayer only has rights. Give me more. I'm not going to pay for it, but give me more. But a citizen has rights, duties, and obligations, which is the same thing that you have if you were part of a congregation of people in a religious setting. You have rights, but you have duties and you have obligations. And if you only go to the synagogue or the church or the temple to decide whether or not you like the rabbi, I don't know, this one's okay. I like the last one a lot more than I like this one. Or I really like this one. That last one, they're not a commodity. They're not for your consumption. They're there to help all of you come together. You have a responsibility to make that happen. So the more we can empower ourselves to do something small for us, for someone else, for the planet, for the universe, the more perhaps we can get into something that is a little more hopeful in at least my eyes. So that's my thing for this week. Happy I got that. I had no idea it was in me, but now it's out and I feel better. It's like a cyst. So that's my thing. Now, I want to introduce a man who I deeply respect, who I met in the first week of the ordination program that I took at Aleph in Colorado after a 17-hour trip that took forever. And I wanted to back out about 5 different times. Just thought, maybe if I just, I can tell them the flight was 7 hours delayed and then there was a ground stop and come on, I can't, because I was afraid that I wasn't going to be smart enough or Jewish enough or learned enough to do this program. And I didn't see anyone the night they did the opening ceremony because I was still in the air. But I got there and the next morning in a shy way, I came into the room and sat down and this rabbi started talking, singing with a guitar and extemporaneously thinking and talking and singing with a guitar. And I thought, who is this person? I feel so good. And all of it melted away. I didn't feel like I was under anyone's scrutiny. I felt like I was being welcomed. And I'll never forget that. And we've had a relationship ever since in all kinds of ways. And I really am looking forward to talking to Rabbi Shawn, Reb Shawn Zevit, a nice Canadian boy who for some reason stays in the United States way past his due date. I have no idea why he's doing this, but there he is. Why are you doing that? Why? This is my first question to you.
At least you didn't say expiration date. At least you said past.
Why do you stay in the United States?
Well, my Landsman, it's such a bracha, such a blessing to be with you here on your podcast. And, I'm going to respond to that evocation. It's not really a question. It's more of a statement and a cry to heaven. But, one of my favorite movie lines, you had me at hello as well when you walked in that room that day. And, and even the name, all the exposition that you shared with us and the name of your program, Not That Kind of Rabbi, this is my kind of program as well, I would say. And your title, it reminds me about at least half of the B'nai Mitzvah that come through my door, or the Benotei Mitzvah, as we start to mix genders and search for a gender fluid Hebrew, who are like, I'm not sure I should be here. I don't really believe. I'm not sure there's a God, and so on. And I remember when I was in rabbinical school, I came to Philadelphia actually in 1993 from Toronto, originally being born in Winnipeg, where all my grandparents and great-grandparents emigrated in the 19-teens from Poland, Ukraine, Russia, Austria. And, and I remember as a young rabbi in training, someone would ask or share their spiritual struggle, and I would try to pull a quote here and this there. And then I remember being with Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, of blessed memory, who was like the grandpa, the Zeta of the Jewish renewal movement, and where I also got private ordination along with my ordination, from RRC. And he said, someone said, I just don't believe in God anymore. And he said, tell me about the God you don't believe in. And 45 minutes later, the person had finished sharing that. And he smiled. He said, I don't believe in that God either. Let's talk some more. And the person went away as if though they had been given a download from Sinai. And he said one sentence. And so I really tried to learn from that. And with people of all ages, but I think specifically of our young people, there's also an image of that we internalize, those of us that seek the spiritual leadership path or spiritual, guidance is in your case, just another form of that, of who we should be in the world. And then the image is mostly pediatric, as Mordecai Kaplan would say. Most of us live pediatric spiritual lives. They get formed when we're kids, and we never grow into the mature spiritual arc. Is a tougher path to go because it means we have to let go and not be solely defined by those moments, or that rabbi that said X to us when we were 8, or that day that the Havdalah candle caught flame and burnt down our favorite toy, and like God had sent that Havdalah candle to destroy my toys, I will never believe again.
But I want to stop you there, because this is a major issue, I think, in every religion, is pediatric spirituality. And I want to get your thoughts on what we do about this idea that you're told these things and they're portrayed to you as miraculous and otherworldly, and no sense of poetry, irony, metaphor is injected. It's just, and then this happened, and then that happened. And it's also portrayed as historical fact quite often. And then a person reaches adolescence where they're questioning everything and rejecting notions that are supernatural in many cases to them. And that's it. It's the, if you want to get rid of the mice, just give them a bar mitzvah, you'll never see them again. They're gone. So what is the answer? There is, I believe, a line in Torah that says you're not to really discuss these major issues and ideas until a person is 20 years of age, which when written would have meant middle age at that point. But what do we do to correct the weakness of that kind of learning?
Well, powerful question too, Ralph. Maybe one of the reasons I'm still here, kind of being deployed where I am in the United States, even though, my heart, I'm a citizen of both countries. I don't use the term dual citizen because I'm a full citizen of both countries, and there's no duality for me in that. That's a non-dual citizenship. The question you ask gets formed by certain strands of Jewish life. And I understand this is a complex answer, but I feel that's how we need to engage people today, not in a reductionist way, because there never has been a Judaism, right? There's the Jewish people through which many Judaisms get expressed. And just like I was davening in our morning service online this morning, Baruch Shemar, Baruch Hu, like you are the many names. In the Kaddish, we say, we lift up the great name, the name that holds many names. We have over 100 different names for God in the Jewish tradition. So if someone is framed by a specific one, that's what we need to be careful of. In the 10 utterances, 10 commandments as they usually get translated, but the 10 utterances, the 10 profound core life values, the not making a graven image, the Hebrew pesel, lifsol means to carve out a piece and make it the whole. So it doesn't say don't make statues or art. My grandfather came from Europe. He was an artist. My great-grandfather, who was a rabbi, sent him to the Chicago School of Art from Winnipeg because Jews actually do that. Now, if I say my painting or my particular view or my definition of God, it trumps everything else, then I'm in that pestle land. I'm starting to elevate a particular refraction or color from the prism of divinity into the whole. And that's what the Jewish approach really to spiritual life in its most ancient way is. So as you were framing some of the conundrum of don't ask questions or this is just the way it is, that's some strands of Judaism. But in evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people, as Mordecai Kaplan, framed it. Sometimes if we go back to the most traditional, you'll find things that subvert what we call tradition today. I'm a liturgical composer. I visited synagogues that have corrected me after a service and said, my cantor sings that piece that you did today. You might want to check with them because I think you got it wrong. I don't say to them, but I wrote it and it's on my CD. That's tradition, right? Tradition is more often what we have gotten used to rather than going back to the sages in the Talmud, for example, who are debating, do we listen to God's voice? No, actually, God gave us the ability to come to our own assessments now. Thank you, God, very much. We'll take it from here. Very what we might consider radical and subversive ideas, and that's where the tradition is derived from. So I think we need to approach it with subtlety, approach, to use maybe not the best analogy, but the end user, meaning when I'm working with young people or others, or in spiritual direction, when someone presents something, for me, that's a place of curiosity. Tell me more. Why do you hold that God is that way and that you've lost your faith because so-and-so died of cancer or this happened and God must have done that?
Okay, but what happens with the kid when you say, and then the Red Sea parted, and then we came through and the Egyptians were drowned, and then manna came from heaven, and then the kid thinks, wow, cool. And then starts to think, what? Come on, that stuff doesn't what do we do with the disconnect from the stories? How do we reframe them in a way that a child could understand, but is still giving more meaning?
Yeah, the way you presented it, though, already that's not, I think, necessarily the way you and I would present it. So I feel, back to the Torah, that the truth is in our hands, in our own heart, not across the sea or up in heaven, which is the whole Deuteronomic replay of everything, try to interpret in light of current, reality. So I don't want to outsource that. I think that's where I need to start. Whoever the them is that told the story, am I one of those people, or am I bringing in, let's take a look at this, and even the Midrash, centuries and centuries old, that says, what was manna? Oh, it might have been coriander seed. It could have been this. Moses was a shepherd. He knew the currents. We don't pre-scientific thought. Already our ancestors were holding a complexity of things in the variety of different interpretations, where there was not an understanding or even what might be seen as contradictory terms or different narratives in the Torah. That was seen as majority-minority or multiple lenses looking at something. And so, we have a history of interpreting things in the light of. I remember, to your point directly, that one of my former B'nai Mitzvah students, and Sam, sadly of blessed memory, life cut short just last summer in a tragic car accident. And Sam loved science and had been working he had Breshit, the beginning of Genesis was his bar mitzvah portion. And he was writing, we were going along. It wasn't always easy for him. And then we had a session, I think a month before his bar mitzvah, where he just broke out, in the session and just saying, this is not my truth. I can't go through with this. What I've written is not true to me. And, and I said, well, what is your truth? He said, well, I believe in science and all these things. I said, well, let's write your truth. Because the Torah starts with the indefinite article. It's not in the beginning. That's a King James interpretation. Bereshit is with beginning. Right? That's why the Kabbalists have alternative stories of creation, because there wasn't just the one moment in time. The idea that creation is constantly evolving. B'chol yom tamid maseh bereshit, as our liturgy says, every day creation is renewed again. And he rewrote it from that perspective, and he ended up writing about wonder and the universe and inequity. As he thought more about it between himself as a white Jewish person and his friends of color. How can we be in the divine image? He didn't reject it. He found a road into it. How can we be in the divine image if my friends of color do not get the same access to education and books because of the school that they're in here. That led him to a sense of justice and wonder, which is the whole point, right? So I just feel that the truth is there. It's not that we throw tradition out or we don't wrestle with it, because I could equally say to you one of the things I see today, and in your opening, as you called it, rant, but your profound words, you talked about the rampant individualism. So is it, the king is dead, long live the king, meaning I dethrone God and put myself in the center and my own individualism, and there's no communitarian connection or no sense of I'm going to shovel my neighbor's walk because, so I like to challenge us in a 360 way, that if we dethrone the Melech energy, like the sovereign king or the supernatural wonder worker, right, what is in that place? Is that a cover for our own ego, or is that an inquiry into wonder and curiosity and connection in this universe?
Well, very well said. I think about a lot about in spiritual life the difference between the ego system and the ecosystem. And I believe we live in an ecosystem where we're at the top of a pyramid of life on this planet, and everything is to feed us. And ecosystem is to know in our humility that we have many different places of connection within a circle of life. And we're not there. And one of the things when I think about spiritual life is the frame in which we work is that of extractive capitalism. And it is the idea of extracting all resources for the maximization of profit, including those within a human being itself. So if that's where we're at, how can we continue to encourage that paradigm of existence and still think that we can get a spiritual life? Or does the spiritual life, as it has been many times for people, get compartmentalized into, I'll go to the high holiday service, or I'll go maybe once a Saturday every month or two, because they can't live it in a system that exploits and extracts and is not just secular, that's just a misnomer to me, but is lacks humanity, lacks spirituality. The Pope writes beautifully, like if you read his encyclical on climate change, and if you listen to the ideologies that they try sometimes to present, they're socialist, if you want to call it that. I mean, it's a communal life. And I know in America, socialist, you must have burn your head on fire for saying it. In Canada, obviously.
I hear it in the Canadian tongue with which you are uttering the word. So,
yes.
As we would grow up, democracy and social good are not antithetical to each other.
So how do we create a spiritual community in a system that atomizes us and separates us on a constant basis to compete with each other, to extract the most from each other? How do we do that?
Well, if I had the immediate answer for you, I think I would be, a spin doctor or something like that, or, wanting to jump out of the conundrum. I will say in terms of flashes that arose for me as I was hearing you speak. And again, as you said in the beginning and oriented us to this time, these pandemic times, or the plague, as you call it, the makot, in Hebrew, we translate as plagues, but it means the hittings, the bruising, the ouches, right? So we're in this time, of profound ouches. And it's also what arose for me as you were speaking is that no relation in terms of COVID being a designation for this virus, but in Hebrew, kavod means a weightiness, a liveriness, and an honorific and great honor, right? So it pivots. So as you were saying that, I was thinking like, my experience of the spiritual life is one of flexidology and the possibility of pivoting while remaining grounded in a set of values and ethical and religious perspectives, but not being ground down. Like even in English, there's those multiple, being grounded and being ground down are very different ideas, right? So there are forces at work, and there are also ways of using the tradition itself to also challenge what people's concepts of this is just the way it is, right? And I grew up, with that. Even the village, the story my Zeta Aaron Zevit told of his family back in Russia, that he wanted to be an artist, I think, as I mentioned earlier. And my great-grandfather, who I knew and loved, he lived till I was, I think, around 11 or so, Ben Sion, was, for me, just such a benign, loving person that the equation of the ritual when he led the Pesach Seder and dressed in his white kittel, for me, there was awesomeness in that as opposed to punitiveness. Now, I also went to Talmud Torah, Hebrew school. So there I received the lashes and, my hair pulled out, getting hit over the head with a book or something, but not at home, where I was presented with a very different approach that way. And my Zeta Aaron talked about his uncle Tsioma, who wanted to be a painter in Russia, and was told, well, our tradition says you don't create images. The day, it was like a jazz singer moment, the day you come in with brushes is your last day in this house. And that's what happened to him. Whereas my grandfather, under his father, who was the same generation from the same village, was supported to go to the Chicago Art School because creativity is a divine value. It suffuses our tradition, right? And therefore, we want to support you to be able to, to do this. So one could say then and now, no. The stories told in my family said it could be all of then or all of now. It could be this system or that system. Now, how are you going to choose? As our tradition also says, I place in you today blessing and curse, life and death. Now, what are you going to choose? So, I hear what you're saying, Ralph, in terms of the societal setup, and at the same time, see the planet arising and not being quiet anymore, right? Visiting on us. We may say, oh, where did these plagues come from? Just like in ancient Egypt, you can look at all the big ouches there, or the plagues there and say, oh, unconscious lack of proper agrarian practices and this and that and the other thing and dumping stuff in the water. There it is. We already have a track record of the disregard for the planet, what that produces. So we're not going to get out of this one, no matter how much we barricade ourselves in ivory towers. I think so many of us are on the ground now, coming from a different place of a reconnecting. It's not the disregard of the ego, but the ego in service of the eco, the ecology. We don't want people to be just wet noodles, right? We want, individual creativity and systemic change and things like that. So that's how I approach it. I reach in to some of the very traditions beyond just one, science, health and well-being, people around me, my own heart. And in that mix, I see so much potential that I don't have to buy into the tropes that are necessarily self-destructive and disempower myself because, quote, that's the way it is. Well, we contributed to that's the way it is. It didn't just appear that way. So clearly we can do something about it. Our will, the equity to do something in our countries, how we vote and who we put in power, how we organize. These are things that I've seen the capacity, and certainly being involved with justice and faith organizations here in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania and some larger places. I've seen us bend that arc of the moral universe to get, now possibly all funding put through a fair funding formula that doesn't, prejudice communities of color, or got a living wage, or for the first time, City Council in Philadelphia, due to lobbying of some of the members of my congregation, has banned certain chemicals from being used in different places. So, for me, it's a great waking up to not go to sleep in the midst of this because of the way things are.
Yeah.
I don't know if that'll turn the tide. What we're in for.
Well, you can only do what you do. Like you can't think, well, what I get often from people is, what difference can I possibly make? Right. And that's not necessarily a good place to come from for any kinds of societal change. But on the other hand, I think it's important to try to agitate for changing the playing field instead of constantly asking the player to make the change. I can sit here sorting my garbage into paper and plastic and wet and dry, and then 67% of it doesn't even reach the recycling depot. So if we don't care, we don't care. If we continue to sprawl our environment and we continue to consume, like one of the things that's happening now is the crisis of consumption. We can't just mindlessly go anywhere to just pass time and feel better. And it's like Seinfeld's old bit about going to buy something. He buys the shoes and by the, I love the shoes when I buy them, but by the time I get home, I don't really like them that much anymore. So what have I done, right? And
he's doing this. The act of buying them, right?
That's all it is.
Not the shoes.
So that's how we fill our souls with these empty gestures of faux immortality. If I get the bigger house and the better car, I'll never die. In part of the aging and saging work, when I do a workshop, I ask them to write their obituary, like, one of the things that we learn to do. And my goodness, they live to 100. And I say, well, think about it. Where's your mother? Dead. Where's your spouse? Probably dead. Everybody you know is dead. It's really, getting old is not for sissies, as, Reb Nadia would tell me. And it's really just a question of how do we value the time we have now, and how do we make spiritual exchange possible with each other, whether it be within our own religious groupings or interfaith-wise, as a unity as opposed to a duality. And yet I still see that we think in these ways. Let me ask you this. How has, from being a child to now, and this one's a toughie, how has when someone says, what is God? Or when you thought, what is God? How did it start, and where's it gotten to?
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think, was it Karen Armstrong who wrote The Evolution of God? There's been a number of books about tracking, even within the Hebrew Bible and beyond, our own evolution of our understanding of, or some people might say, the evolution of God or God consciousness. And you and I know that Germanic root of that word means to bring forth or evoke. So as Reb Zalman and Rabbi David Cooper, now blessed memory, said, God is a verb. So let's hold our premise that if we create God as a noun, we are back in the place of idolatry. The root word in Hebrew and English is all an active principle. And so how we use the descriptor activates a certain biochemical, mental, emotional, and physical construct. And, that's what we need to pay attention to. What deflates, what motivates, are we stuck in the noun, of life, or are we, in faith in action, right, by understanding that God, is a verb. I want to go there. And as you were talking, I was just wondering, it'll be so interesting to see where we as humanity go because of, quote, the plague, as you mentioned to it, how that has exposed inequities that we could have hidden behind in our societies, how that has also flattened access. Those of us that have been working through the technologies who are, on one hand, and I'll include myself, as soon as the Zoom service is over, or the ritual or the program, there's a certain deflation and an emptiness about not being able to talk with you, over a slice of your mustard, from your sponsor, or whatever it may be, and at the same time, everyone has a front row seat. The level of intimacy that people tell me they've experienced, the fact that they're not in row 20 or even in the circle some way, off to the side or third row, but everybody can be scanned and is, if they choose to reveal themselves. So what's going to happen in India because they've been able to see mountains that were obscured by smog for decades, but they're seeing them now? Will the human soul be willing to go back to blindness once things have been revealed? So that's not as easy to do as if you keep the blinders on yourself or by authoritarian structures. So I think there's something itself very interesting about the pain and the human suffering of our time and the amount of lives lost, and also the dust it has kicked up and the dust that is cleared out, including our spending. for many of us, my wife and I were just talking the other day about we did better than expected this year because look at all the frivolous things we didn't spend on because we weren't out there caught by the shiny object, in the way you were talking about the shoes. So I think in some ways to treat our own spiritual lives as a evolving project unfolding and not as a beginning and end destination. I mean, my own personal experience of God's presence in my life was palpable from a child. I mean, I also witnessed, elders in my life, with deep piety. I remember my grandmother, Rose, who took a journey over a decade in Alzheimer's, one day crying out, screaming from the bedroom, and my grandfather and I running in, what? And she's like, look at the sunset. Have you ever seen such a great sunset? And suddenly the two of us who were busy just doing were enrolled in her,
being.
In her being in awe of the sunset and that moment. And so,
but my first God was a cop. My first God was a cop, right? Watching me, making sure I behaved myself,
yes.
Judging me, my morality. And that was the God I had for a long time. You're saying even as a small child, you didn't have that officer God, you had an experiential God?
I also had Hebrew day school, and, the Punisher definitely was there, and being sent to the office, and, a variety of things. But for me, I experienced God very personally, had those dialogues, felt that presence. And then interestingly enough, around the time of my bar mitzvah, I felt that God leave very profoundly one night. Like I was growing up and that God would be with me, but wasn't going to be with me as a child anymore. And for me, more so than the vague remembrances I have of the actual day, was my bar mitzvah. And I still have the papers that I wrote to God about, my feelings about this and the sense of God asking me to grow up, but not abandoning me, but at the same time, not necessarily going to be the same way. And then we moved to Australia. I went to public school, and I kind of left that God project and even active spiritual practice until my early 20s, when with one of my professors from York University, Alan Richardson, and a band of us formed Trinity Theatre at the time, and that began a decade-long exploration of deep social and spiritual and Canadian history, and that reawoke in me something as a young adult, and evolutions then of the input of psychology and theology and a whole variety, and the public welfare and social justice, all mixed in to impact that. And what I will say to fast forward this, Ralph, is that over time then, the vicissitudes of life, the relationships come and gone, the ending of a first marriage, various miscarriages, jobs that ended in certain ways, relationships that, for me, mysteriously, how can a friendship end or drift away? My own naivete that something wouldn't just remain eternal in that. I started to feel some of my own sense of where is God in this? And I remember, or what is, not just where anymore, but what is? And am I creating this as a panacea against my own suffering? Or is God the call to enter more deeply into it and to accept more of reality rather than have a construct that buffers me and falsely comforts me from the suffering in the world and within myself? And I remember just before the last conversation I had with Reb Zalman before he died, about a month, because every now and then he used to bust in on my Skype, at that time Skype, not Zoom calls, and I'd be in the middle of something and go, no, so what's happening? And I say, can I call you back in 10? I'm just finishing with something. So, it was very sweet. So I got back to it. I said, I'm really struggling here in my own life with the idea of belief. And I remember he said to me, and I've been in spiritual directing, even though or as a requirement of being a spiritual director. So since 1999, and now as training people as well. And I found even with my own spiritual director, when I started to bring up issues, some of which you have articulated beautifully in your questions today. What about this? Or how can this be? And having my spiritual director invite me to be with the question, to almost see that God was a power inviting me to let God go in order to find the new truth emerging and not be stuck, kind of chained to an idea that was no longer serving. And the way Reb Zalman reflected it when I said, question about belief, he said, well, don't be so arrogant to talk about does God exist or not, because that's beyond your and my pay grade to talk about existence. But belief, believe in God, don't believe in God, challenge the beliefs, open to the new ones. That's the living God, as King David would say in the Bible. Mine is the living God, Elohim Chayim, which for me has always been profound, is if those God ideas are deadening you or dead to you, then they're no longer the living God. It's become a fossil. And so that has been helpful to me to both feel into the suffering of the loss of a God I might have known and felt kinship with, and at the same time be open to, as we said before, every child, half of the children that come through, or the adults, staying in this conversation. I offered a course at the synagogue a couple of years ago of Finding God, modern paths. And, a lot of people were there all over the map. People that came in with the sense of, I feel a personal direction in my life and a being that is part of that I can rely on, right down to humanist, viewpoints of we have God as a construct by which we measure our pain, quote John Lennon, and so on. So, and all the things in between. And what I found fascinating, that for me, God is a concept big enough to not have to have me defend. Or as Thomas Merton once said, you can tell a level of a person's religious insecurity with the loudness with which they proclaim their beliefs.
To me, spirituality, the anathema of spirituality is certainty. There's the arrogance. When someone, I was listening to somebody give a talk about Kabbalistic notions of the afterlife, and he was into such architectural detail of the afterlife. And I thought, how on earth can you be that sure of something that we can't possibly be that sure of, because we're not in an afterlife? And I realized that for some people, what they call faith is really a desire to cling to certainty. And I guess the effects of Eastern religion on me have been very healthy in my life in terms of not seeing two things. One is the duality. There's me, and then there's this God thing. I see it as I'm a molecular piece of something unknowable, but seriously happening at this moment in time. And that's enough. I don't need to put a name to it. I certainly don't think there's a file being kept with Ralph on it. So I'm really just seeing things as the spiritual part of our lives is the part that animates. And when you were speaking about the turning point for you to return, to me, what I heard was it was like some of your relatives, art. It was art, theater, music, the guitar, your gift, and that stuff transcends rationality. We could all be as clever as we like about what we think religions are, but that isn't really what matters. I say to people all the time, the person who lives in Croatia and doesn't speak a word of English goes to a U2 concert and waves their hand in the air and has their phone going, still haven't found. They don't care if they know the words. People go and sing in Hebrew, and if I interrupted them halfway through the prayer, I'd say, what are you saying right now in English? They haven't a clue. 50 years of singing that song, and they haven't a clue. And it doesn't matter. It's the non-rational that allows them to experience something that is about the interconnectivity of everything. As Rabbi Waskow says, breathe life into the tree breathes life into you. He's got a new book about this, right? So these things to me are the spiritual aspects that you can't, in a rational world, they've become more and more difficult for us to, like, you want a buzzkill at a dinner party, say God. And people are like, oh, that's so cute. You actually believe in God. And they think that they know what that means for me to believe in God. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm just trying to accept that I am part of something so much bigger than I can possibly imagine, and just bending my knee to it. Right? It's a strange thing.
And which is, if you look at the roots of the practice, of course, that's where it comes from. Our tradition does come from the Middle East and from the East that way. So even the idea of dominion over the world, again, a translation into Old English, when you think of mastery in Eastern religions, right? I don't see, a huge truck, unearthing, a former forest or cutting down trees. I see someone who's like centered, who has mastery. I think of Zen practitioners, some of the ancient sages who were able to align themselves with nature and work on those patterns, be healing agents and so on. So the idea of mastery, coming from the Hebrew rather than dominion over the earth, it requires alignment and in fact less effort, right? You see that in so many of the Asian pictures, for example, like all the newbies are using their powers and whatever, and the master is sitting there and goes, and 4 trees fall over, right? So, it's that aspect of being in alignment with all of nature and creation, and having mastery over one's impulses, the power with instead of power over. So we can draw on some of these concepts for the prime challenges that we face in life today. And I know we're at our time at this point too, but I just want to maybe come back to you for a moment. And I'm intrigued the table is round between us, so there's no turning the table. But I just, I'm interested to know where our conversation, which, just was organic in its own way, as opposed to, count these steps there, where this has left you. If there's something you're leaving our conversation with that may be affirming or different than from where we began.
So I'm left with the differences between being and doing in a society obsessed with doing that leaves almost no room for being. And I wonder, because you work in the organizational, institutional aspects of Judaism, not just, having nice thoughts and reading nice books. You have congregational responsibilities and duties, and you are extremely committed to social action and social justice. And I wonder if people listening wouldn't want to know is there an eco-social, an eco-spiritual movement that they can find their way into? Because I think a lot of the progressive movement, as it's labeled, prides itself in its secularism. And that the right, as it's called, prides itself in its religiosity. And that neither is working very well for either side. They're both being perverted. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to turn it, the lazy Susan is now moving in the other direction, my friend. The eco-spiritual, where are we at on the eco-spiritual?
Well, I think I think we're fortunate to live in an age, and this is me coming off the 4-day Jewish climate change festival online that had like hundreds of speakers and hundreds of thousands of participants and dozens of workshops and all the rest of that through Chazon, which is the largest in the United States Jewish environmental organization, but also thinking of 350.org, McKinnon and the whole gang of which many of us are a part, local initiatives that many churches, synagogues, mosques, Buddhist temples, and so on are involved with, plus here I know in Philadelphia through our Power Interfaith, which is a chapter of Faith in Action nationally, which is a multi-faith justice network. We're on the ground floor of climate justice, which includes addressing racial inequities, not just environmental ones. And separating them leaves a whole group of people in the world or in our own communities out. So that climate justice action, and we are getting our energy providers to change. We're seeing laws reenacted. So I think in that place where you can be both contemplative and activist and find your way in your moment in calling. Some of us will hit the streets, sit in at the energy office, and so on. But others of us are, need to be changing the diapers and paying attention to the little ones who are going to be the next generation's head of the eco-faith organization.
But where's the God? Where's the God in the where is the God? Is the God necessary? Is God necessary in this action?
Well, God is the fuel or the spiritual vibrancy or the language, and all the places I just mentioned to you, they're not secular organizations. They are bringing in faith and culture and religious life as a catalyst, as a proof text to the very action that we're doing, and then respecting all the variations in that ecumenical, diverse table. And for me, then, saying, well, if we really believe that we are divine emanations, then how are we treating each other this way? And so I see the inspiration and the energizing. I see them in kids who do their bar bat mitzvah projects at our synagogue, half of whom choose environmental topics to do, and here, I'll leave you with this example. You may not leave our conversation, but for this particular piece. 2 years ago, we have a B'nai Mitzvah family fund. We ask everyone to invite.
This is before bar mitzvah. B'nai Mitzvah, for people who don't know, is before bar mitzvah.
Exactly, right. So the families contribute. We say, don't buy each other gifts. There's enough stuff, like you've pointed out, in the world. Let's contribute to a fund. And then I work with the kids at the end of the year. Where did that money gets directed based on what their own families, have raised. So we do a values-based process where we study Jewish texts on, and then on leadership and giving, and then people put in their ideas where they want the funds directed. The last few years, environmental causes, number one. No one even wants to consider anything else. But here was the beauty for me of our young people. So, okay, we're all in that. Now, where does it go? 4 different organizations get mentioned, 3 national and 1 local, happen to be Power, that we're part of, I mentioned before. And so they start debating, and they say, well, the oceans are messed up. We can give it to the Clean the Ocean or the Save the Whatever Fund, but they get other monies, and they're so global that response is so big. I don't know what impact we'll have. And then, the conversation shifts to, well, are we part of this organization that's actually working to change energy patterns here in the city of Philadelphia? And immediately everyone had consensus that that's where the money should go, because we could have direct and immediate impact in our own city, not on some elusive larger piece that will in fact have impact on that larger use of energy, and our tradition and our faith and our spiritual language helped us derive there to say, love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
So that means I actually got to pay attention to my neighbor, not the concept of neighbor, but my actual neighbor. And so that drove them to do that. Power sent a rabbi to receive the check. We did a big thing, and the kids got lauded, and they felt more motivated as a result. So I see those direct actions where faith, the local is global, the personal is political, not just as sayings, but as catalysts and inspirational aspects to do the holy work that you and I have been talking about for the last, I think, 6 hours at this point.
Global. So for me, a spiritual Jewish gift to the world would be a global Sabbath project. That to me, because if the world one day of the week had a real Sabbath, you would reduce GHG emissions, somebody said, 12% per year, right there. If we could find a way to, this is our greatest gift as Jews. This is what I feel. Sabbath is the greatest gift we have. The Sabbath year, the Sabbath day, the Sabbath half century, the 49 years. I mean, to me, that is us being able to just say, one day of being, 6 days of doing is enough. Because we're on 7 days of doing, and we can't sustain it. So I'd love that to be a destination. All right. I'm going to let you go.
Well, I want to say to what you just said, though, that for our listeners to think of that Sabbath consciousness not only as a practice. So I like to ask myself, there are traditional categories in the Jewish tradition of what comprises that, but to think globally in that way means applying a Sabbath consciousness, not just a prescribed series of acts that way, because not everybody is on the same level of observance or interpretation. But I don't want us to give us an out so that we say, oh, that's for religiously observant people. No, if I take the consciousness, the attributes of the being doing, of the stepping away from consumerism and so on, not necessarily stepping away from technology, but thinking, how am I going to use this differently? I'm going to go for a walk today. I am going to watch a movie, but Sabbath consciousness says I'm going to watch a movie about a documentary about part of the earth or loving relationships. I'm not going to see something blown up and destroyed on the Sabbath. That leaves us with 3 movies to watch. But at the same time, I want our listeners to think not just what am I going to do in the realm of being, but how am I going to think and frame the questions of Sabbath consciousness as well as Sabbath practice.
Rabbi, I love talking to you. It's wonderful.
I love being with you too.
You know that Bachelor Levine thing? You know that Bachelor Levine thing? I love that. I love that woman's voice. She's fantastic. All right. I want you to take care of yourself. A blessing for you, for all that you do, for all the people that you care for all the passion you have in your heart for this world and for our relationships to each other. And we never even talked about our work with men, but we'll do that on another podcast. But for all of what you do and all that you've done for me, I bless you, and I'm thankful that you're part of my life and part of this world.
Amen to that. Mine too. How can the listeners find this in the future, as well as get the free coffee cup if they listen to this?
Thank you for pointing that out. This show is brought to you by Kaplansky's Mustard, my friends. You got to try Kaplansky's Mustard. It's at kaplanskysdeli.com. And it's got a code that you can use, NTKR. Kaplansky's is also at Terminal 3 in Pearson Airport. Great smoked meat. I'm a vegetarian, but I'm sure it's great. Purveyors of world-class mustard delivered to your door. Who knew? And Rabbi, if people want your music, which I love, how can they find you and purchase some of that music and listen to it?
Oh, well, thank you, my friend. Stuff is up on YouTube and eBay and Amazon. Carry all my CDs, and then the usual suspects. iTunes, oysongs.org carries a lot of Jewish artists. So you can just Google Zevit, or to translate south of the 49th, Zevit, and you'll find that material there. So.
You said the Z word. We need you back here.
I want it to be inclusive.
Yeah, come home one day. God willing, you should come home.
Okay.
All right, you take care of yourself.
I'm working on it, brother. Lots of love. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, take care.
Bye.
This podcast has been produced by TMDS and accelerated by Roam Phone. Roam Phone brings you the most reliable virtual phone service to run your business and protect your home number from unwanted calls. Visit romephone.ca to get started.